Yes! Welcome back to Ed Hunts. Today I will be highlighting 12 games that were released outside of the UK that CeX have on their stock system and pay out a substantial amount for. We will be covering a range of games on a number of retro consoles, with one console in particular where not only are all the games import, but the console itself is too, and the amount you would get for these might shock you. So without further ado, run!
Snowboard Kids 2!
The first import game CeX paid big money for is Snowboard Kids 2 on the N64. A sequel to the well-received N64 game of the same name, Snowboard Kids 2 was developed by Racdim, published by Atlus, and retains much of its core gameplay from its predecessor, adding numerous features such as a fleshed out story mode, new tracks, new unlockable playable characters, and recurring boss battles. Whilst this prequel is readily available in CeX at a reasonable cost, the same cannot be said about the follow-up release. Snowboard Kids 2 was released in Japan and the US in early 1999, however the game only received a PAL release in Australia, releasing in April of that same year. Highly coveted by collectors with no copy currently available on CeX's stock system and only one legitimate looking loose copy on eBay, CeX will pay £159 cash or £192 voucher for just a loose copy of the game, a staggering £487 cash or £562 voucher just with the box and no manual, and a mind-boggling £1,125 voucher or £975 cash for a mint boxed copy. One certainly to look out for. 2. The second import game CeX paid big money for is a movie-to-game adaptation, Cool World on the Super Nintendo. Cool World the movie was released in the summer of 1992 with a star-studded cast including Brad Pitt, Kim Basinger and Frank Sinatra Jr. and released on the back of the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with Cool World having a similar presentation style of combining cartoon and reality. Alongside the movie, Cool World the game was initially released as a platformer on Game Boy, MS-DOS, Atari, Amiga and Commodore 64 in line with the release of the movie, with a totally different game releasing on the Super Nintendo and NES in 1993. The Super Nintendo version was developed by a British studio, Painting by Numbers, and published by Ocean, with the NES version being developed and published by Ocean. It seems peculiar that neither console port received a UK release, considering they were both developed and published by UK-based companies. The Spanish PAL version is the only version on CeX's stock system, with a loose cart netting you £55 cash or a £66 voucher, a box copy up to £211, and a mint copy could make you a whopping £325 cash and a £375 voucher. CeX currently have no available copies in stock, with the cheapest loose cart available on eBay at around £200. 3. The first game to be developed by CyberConnect, who went on to adapt a number of animes onto modern consoles including Dragon Ball Z, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Naruto, amongst many others, and created the original IP Dot Hack on PlayStation 2, and published by Bandai, Tel Concerto is an action-adventure platformer set in a steampunk fantasy world inhabited by anthropomorphic cats and dogs. The player controls Waffle Rybread, who controls a semi-humanoid mecha the game names Police Robo, as he investigates the Black Cats Gang, a group of sky pirates who aim to steal magic crystals. An early adopter of the DualShock controls and vibration feedback introduced on the PlayStation 1, Tel Concerto sold poorly on release, falling far short of Bandai's expectations. Initially releasing in Japan, with a release coming a few months later in France and the following year in North America, retrospective reviews of the game have been generally positive and has become somewhat of a collector's item amongst PlayStation 1 collectors. CeX currently only stock the PAL French version, with no copies currently in stock. A boxed mint copy of Tel Concerto could net you £146 cash or £168 in store voucher.
Hey! You idiot! You got chocolate all over the crystal!
4. The second installment to the Fatal Fury franchise, Fatal Fury 2 is a fighting game developed by SNK, releasing initially on arcades in 1992, and introduces a number of characters that would become synonymous with the franchise, including Mai Shiranui, who is now one of SNK's main mascots, and Kim Kafwan, the first Korean fighter featuring in any game up to that point. Whilst not many mechanics were changed from the first installment, a number of special moves and stages were added to the mix. After its initial arcade release, the game was ported to many consoles, including the Super Famicom, Super Nintendo, Mega Drive and Neo Geo AES. However, CeX only stocked the Australian Power Mega Drive version. Whilst the game is easy to pick up on the Super Famicom in a box condition, the Mega Drive version is quite the opposite. CeX currently have no copies in stock, with a loose copy netting the seller £87 cash or a £105 voucher, and even a box copy with no manual paying out an astonishing £292 cash and a £337 voucher. A mint copy pays out a staggering £487 cash or £562 voucher. Currently, only one copy of the Australian Mega Drive copy is on eBay, a box copy with no manual for £800, which has now sold on June 24th. Crazy.
5.
Virtual Boy.
Now on to one of the biggest disappointments in gaming history, the Virtual Boy and its entire software library. Released by Nintendo in 1995 and stylized as the first home games console that could render and display stereoscopic 3D graphics, it instead featured a monochrome red display viewed through a binocular eyepiece, with games employing a parallax effect to simulate depth. Needless to say, the console flopped in both Japan and North America due to a number of causes, including giving users headaches after a short time of use, a lack of portability, and an overall non-ergonomic design, amongst a host of other reasons. Whilst a handful of games were positively reviewed, such as Virtual Boy Wario Land and Tele-Road Boxer, the vast majority of the games were universally panned, and as a result, the Virtual Boy was discontinued by Nintendo only 1 year after its release in 1996. 22 games in total were released for the Virtual Boy in both Japanese and North American territories, with power regions being ignored altogether due to poor sales in the aforementioned regions. However, CeX have every single game on their stock system listed in all conditions from loose to mint condition, with the game that pays out the highest being the Japanese release of SD Gundam Dimension War in mint condition, and if you were to trade this in today, you would receive a whopping £910 cash or £1,050 in store credit. As you can imagine, none are currently in stock, mint or otherwise. CeX also stock the console itself and all the accessories that were released in its short time of being around. The most expensive of these is the Mosaic Edition console in a box condition, which will pay out £448 cash or £517 voucher. Again, there are currently no Virtual Boy consoles in stock.
6.
Sticking with Nintendo for our next entry, we have Whirlo, released in 1992 on the Super Nintendo. The very definition of a standard mascot 2D platformer, which were highly prevalent at the time, Whirlo, published by Namco, is a sequel to a game released on the Famicom, which I don't care to try to pronounce, and follows Whirlo, also known as Krino Zandra in Japan, as he hunts for medicine to save his son, after he becomes sick when an explosion is heard all around the land of Marvel, producing a toxic cloud which makes many of its residents sick. Unreleased in North American territories, Whirlo only had a limited release in European power regions, only doing so in Spain, and as a result comes with a high price. CeX have the game on their system, however none are currently in stock, and if you were to trade in a mint box copy today, you would receive £292 cash or £337 voucher. The cheapest legitimate cart currently available on eBay is at around £250. However, the Super Famicom version is far cheaper if you are interested in owning the game.
7.
Another Super Nintendo game now, and that is Brawl Brothers. Developed and published by Jaleco and released late 1992 in Japan and early 1993 in other territories, Brawl Brothers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up similar to that of Streets of Rage and is the second game in the Rushing Beat series, after Rival Turf was followed up by the Peacekeepers, all released on the Super Nintendo. Interestingly, Brawl Brothers is the only Super Nintendo game to be known to have its Japanese version on the same cartridge as its English counterpart, accessible through a cheat code. The Japanese version of the game features different character names, an expanded ending, and the addition of a groin kick move for Slash. The first game in the Rushing Beat series, Rival Turf, is available in CEX, although only loose copies are available as the recording of this video, and the Peacemakers never received a PAL release, so it's not on the CEX system. Brawl Brothers, whilst not receiving a UK release, it did get released in Germany and is another high price game on the CEX system. A mint box copy will pay out £455 cash or a £525 voucher.
8.
Galactic warfare takes risk, determination, and most of all, the strategic mind of a brilliant military genius. I lose again! StarCraft. All-out war on N64.
Moving back to Australian PAL Nintendo 64 games now, and next on our list is StarCraft 64 for the Nintendo 64. Initially released on PC and Mac in 1998 and later ported to the Nintendo 64 in 2000 in North America and 2001 in Australia, StarCraft 64 was developed and published by Blizzard Entertainment and is a real-time strategy game similar to that of World of Warcraft. Having never personally played a real-time strategy game in the past, it's difficult to summarise what makes this game so special. However, it is widely known as the benchmark of the RTS genre, a game immediately recognised by Nintendo 64 collectors as one of its most coveted titles. StarCraft 64 is perhaps the game on this list which has been on CEX system the longest, as I remember personally seeing the game on the website as far back as 2015. A loose copy of StarCraft 64 pays out £191 cash and a £231 voucher, with a mint box copy paying out a mind-boggling £715 cash and an £825 voucher. The cheapest loose legitimate Australian copy on eBay is going for around £325.
9.
The only Game Boy game to make this list, Trip World was developed and published by Sunsoft and originally released in Japan in late 1992 and later in PAL territories in 1993. A spiritual successor to Gimmick, also made by Sunsoft on the NES, in the semi-linear platformer, the player takes control of Yakupu, a Shibubu with shape-shifting abilities, taking on 5 boss-ending stages in varying environments from the mountains to the jungle in order to find the stolen flower of peace, of which its absence has made the inhabitants of Trip World go mad. Having no American release and only releasing in Germany and Scandinavian territories, Trip World is highly coveted by Game Boy collectors and commands a high price. CEX have the German version on their system, but to probably no one's shock, they currently have no copies in stock, loose or otherwise. A box copy with no manual will net you a whopping £455 cash or £525 voucher, with a mint in box copy paying a mind-blowing £715 cash and £825 voucher. It's also worth noting limited run re-release Trip World on the Switch and as a Game Boy Color boxed title. However, CEX stock neither of these versions.
10.
手震えて対戦できるちっちゃすごい携帯ゲーム機ポケモンミニ
Moving on to the biggest oddity on this list in my opinion, and that is Togepi's Great Adventure on the Pokemon Mini. So what is the Pokemon Mini, some of you might ask? Well, the Pokemon Mini is the smallest Nintendo console ever released by the company, requiring only one AAA battery to run, and was released in conjunction with the Pokemon Company, first releasing at the newly opened Pokemon Center, New York, USA in November 2001, the following month in Japan, and in spring 2002 in Europe. Measuring less than 3 inches in height, the Pokemon Mini displays a monochrome display much like that of the Game Boy, as a real-time clock, infrared data port for multiplayer games, a reed switch to detect when the device is shaken, and a motor for force feedback. Only 10 games were officially released for the console, and all feature the Pokemon franchise prominently, costing a mere $45 or $82 adjusted for inflation in 2025 on release and packaged with Pokemon Party Mini. Only 5 of these games were released in PAL territories. However, CEX have all 10 on their stock system, with Togepi's Great Adventure being the highest in value out of the 10 and only releasing in Japan. Paying out more than a mint box copy of Pokemon Emerald on the Game Boy Advance, a box copy of Togepi's Great Adventure with the manual will pay £240 cash or £277 in store credit, with a mint copy paying out slightly more at £273 cash and £315 voucher. As with most other entries on this list, CEX currently have none in stock.
11,
Now to a game that most of you will be familiar with, and that is one of the greatest games to ever be made by Nintendo, and a game that needs no introduction, The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Now you might be saying, Ed, what are you on about? CEX have been buying and selling Ocarina of Time for N64 for many years now, and they've got loads of copies in stock. Well, you would certainly be correct on that point. However, Australia received a unique release of the game that UK Power did not, and that was on a gold cartridge. One of the few games on this list that CEX currently have in stock, and is one of the cheaper games to feature. A boxed Australian copy with no manual will net you £81 cash or £93 voucher, with a mint box copy paying out £182 cash and a £210 voucher.
12,
The final game on this list of import games that CEX buy and sell is The Smurfs Travel the World, known as its French name, which I would not like to butcher, released on the Mega Drive, Game Gear and Sega Master System in 1996. If the year sounds late for a Master System release, that's because it is, as it was the last officially released game for the system in PAL territories. The game is a standard 2D platformer and a sequel to The Smurfs, also released on Master System and other consoles of the same or next generation. It is currently tied as the second most expensive Master System game on the CEX system, with a mint in box copy paying out £227 cash and £262 in voucher. So that brings us to the end of this list, but there are more import games that CEX buy in and sell, so I will do a part 2 of this video sometime in the future. I really do hope you enjoyed this video and perhaps learned a nugget or two of information on the way. So if you did, hit that like button, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.